She just handles mail. That line sharp careless tossed between sips of overpriced mimosa lands like a slap across my face. My cousin Jenna says it with a snort, her manicured fingers fluttering over the rim of her glass. The table laughs. Even my uncle, retired Navy, grins like it's some harmless inside joke. My mother presses her lips together but says nothing. And me, I sit perfectly still, the butter knife in my hand, hovering midair, half a smear of jam on my plate, and the rest of my dignity bleeding out slowly onto the white linen tablecloth. They don't know. I swallow hard, the metallic taste of restraint tightening in my throat. I look down, eyes tracing the embroidered monogram of the napkin, an elegant F for Franklin House, this ridiculous brunch spot in D.C., where my family insists on gathering when someone gets a new title or a fancier job. This time, it's for Brandon, my second cousin, who just became a senior international policy analyst, whatever the hell that means when you're 26 and your dad funds half the think tank. I clear my throat. I could say something. I could. I want to. But I don't. Instead, I look across the table at my mother. She's adjusting the sleeve of her cardigan, pretending not to hear. Her eyes flick toward mine briefly and look away. That's what she always does. Looks away when they dismiss me. They all still think I'm a glorified postwoman, sorting packages in a back office on base, pushing paper while the real work happens in briefing rooms and overseas combat zones. They have no idea what kind of mail I've handled, no idea that this morning, just 5 hours ago, I decrypted and hand-delivered an intel packet so sensitive it didn't exist on paper. That I stood in a gray concrete hallway behind 3 layers of biometric doors while a colonel reviewed counter-surveillance strategy on a tablet I wiped clean 30 seconds later. That I keep secrets not even the president gets unless he has need to know. But to them, I'm just Elise. 34 unmarried still doing that military job. The quiet one. The one who doesn't speak much at these things. The one they call when they need a ride from the airport or a place to stay while they intern in D.C., but never the one they ask about, never the one they respect. Jenna keeps going. I mean, we all have our roles, right? Brandon handles real-world policy, Elise handles... what envelopes? More laughter. I take a sip of water, slow and steady, and taste the slight sting of lemon. My pulse is hammering behind my ears. The sound of my own breath is louder than their chatter. I press my thumb into the rim of my glass until it hurts. Don't speak, I tell myself. Not yet. But inside, something shifts. A coiled rope of old tension pulls tighter. All these years of being polite, being silent, being the good one. I glance toward the Inmanros. A man in uniform walks in not standard dress blues, but a distinct Pentagon liaison badge clipped to his coat. He scans the room once and spots me, nods. I nod back, barely perceptible. Jenna's still talking. Anyway, it's not like she's in the field. Right, Elise? You just kind of file things. The room spins with a new kind of heat. There's a thrum under my skin that feels like fire. Like all the years of mockery, all the holidays spent swallowing what I really wanted to say have condensed into this one moment. I look up at her, directly, finally. No, I say. The table quiets. I push back my chair. Actually, I add voice calm, steady. I do a little more than that. That's when the man in uniform approaches. He stands beside me and murmurs low but clear, "Ma'am. Clearance Alpha is requested. Immediate presence required. Ma'am." That one word, the way he says it, echoes louder than any insult at the table. The whole family freezes. Even Brandon's mouth hangs slightly open. I rise smooth down the hem of my blazer and reach for my bag. Sorry to cut this short, I say to the stunned table. National security waits for no brunch. And with that, I turn heels clicking on marble, heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with power. Let them laugh now. Let them wonder. As I follow the liaison out, I glance back one last time, not at Jenna, not at Brandon, but at my mother. She's watching me, really watching. Her hand is over her mouth. The heavy wooden doors close behind me. And the story begins. I was never the favorite. Not in school, not at home, and certainly not around that brunch table. I grew up in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Quiet suburb red brick houses, flagpoles on every lawn. My dad, a former postal worker, believed in routine. My mom, a nurse, believed in not making waves. Together they raised 3 kids who were supposed to stay in line, go to college, get a job, and maybe join the PTA someday. We weren't rich, but we had rules. And in our house, rules were gospel. My brothers, stars. Dylan, the oldest, was captain of everything. Football debate, even the prom planning committee. Michael, the middle child, followed close behind, joined the army. Out of high school, came back in a uniform, and never let anyone forget it. Our family still talks about the time he got a handshake from a 2-star general at a base ceremony. That photo's still on the mantle. And then there was me, Elise. Quiet, awkward, straight A student who never raised her hand. I liked books more than people, maps more than dates, and I asked too many questions about how things worked, why people lied, what it meant to really serve without being seen. I didn't have the presence Dylan did or the charm Michael carried like cologne. I had focus. I had details. I had notebooks full of answers no one asked for. When I said I wanted to join the Air Force, everyone paused like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. My dad blinked. My mom said, "Are you sure, honey? You don't even like flying." Michael laughed outright. "What you gonna be, one of those parade girls with the flags?" I didn't bother correcting him. I enlisted at 22. They assigned me to communications support, which sounded like the least glamorous thing imaginable to my family. "So, you send emails," my cousin Sarah once asked, like Gmail, but for jets. What I actually did was far less simple and far more important. I was trained to manage classified communication, Monroe's for routing encrypted intelligence between field assets and command centers. In English, I carried messages that could make or break missions. I was part of a link in a chain no one talks about, but everyone depends on, and I was good at it. No, I was surgical. I triple-checked coordinates, memorized timing down to the second. I became the person they trusted when something absolutely positively could not get lost, delayed, or intercepted. But the job had a cover. To most people on base, I looked like a logistics tech moving sealed packages from one office to another, sometimes under escort. I wore no medals, made no noise. People joked that I worked in the mailroom. Even inside the military, no one really understood what I did. And back home, forget it. Still doing admin stuff Dad would ask on the phone. "Sounds stable." Michael would tease me. "Make sure those paper clips are sharp, Captain." At family reunions, they introduced me as Elise. "She's in the Air Force, but not like combat." You know. Then they'd pivot to talk about Dylan's new promotion at the real estate firm. I stopped trying to explain it. I became invisible, and weirdly, that became a kind of strength. Because while they were laughing, I was collecting clearances. I moved from base to base, Norfolk, San Diego, Colorado Springs, then finally D.C. I watched friends burn out, retire early, or fade into mediocrity. I didn't. I just got better. I didn't ask for praise. I asked for responsibility. And they gave it to me slowly, silently, but steadily. At 30, I was reassigned to a secure intelligence hub near Arlington. Level 4 clearance, direct access to high-priority briefings. I moved documents that never existed on paper, carried codes meant for no eyes, but 2. I was one of the last living links in an increasingly digital world, because sometimes a person untrackable, unknowable is the only safe delivery system left. But no one in my family ever knew that. To them, I was just a clerk with good benefits. There was one person who did see it, my mentor, Colonel Adrienne Shaw. She wasn't warm, but she was honest. Once, after a late-night relay shift went off flawlessly, she pulled me aside and said, "There are people who talk, and there are people who move things. You move things." She retired last year. When she did, she left me her spot informally, of course. The job title didn't change. But the weight of what passed through my hands, it tripled. It should have felt triumphant. It didn't. Because that kind of responsibility comes with silence. You can't tell anyone, not even the people you love. And when those people already think you're nothing special, just someone who handles mail, it gets harder to hold your head up. Especially when you start believing them. I remember one Christmas just a year ago. We were all crowded in the living room, eggnog and bad sweaters. Michael started telling some story about a high-value asset they'd secured overseas. I mean, not to brag, he said, elbowing me, but that's what real military work looks like. I smiled, said nothing. What I didn't tell him was that the handoff for that exact operation had come through me 3 weeks earlier, that I'd personally delivered the redacted brief to his commanding officer, that without it there wouldn't have been a mission. But I couldn't say that. Ever. So I just sat there, holding my mug, letting the story play out. And that's when I realized something. Sometimes invisibility isn't a punishment. Sometimes it's power. You don't see a shadow until it moves. And when it does, it changes everything. There's a peculiar kind of pain that comes not from being hated but from being underestimated. Repeatedly, casually, like a running joke no one remembers to stop telling. I lived with that kind of pain for years. At work, I was called reliable, solid, efficient. Words that sound like compliments until you realize they're placeholders for something they're not willing to admit essential. Irreplaceable. Trusted with lives. At home, I was quiet Elise. The one who didn't talk much, who showed up to holidays with a pie and left without a single story told about her. The one whose job to them was still a blur of acronyms they never bothered to ask about. They didn't know about the late-night encrypted data relays I ran in silence, or the times I rerouted intel fast enough to stop an ambush from becoming a massacre, or the fact that I knew names and faces that didn't officially exist. To them, I was a supporting character in a family full of main-stage performers. Michael, especially. Always loud, always joking. He had that classic Army bravado, confident big smile, buzzed haircut even after retirement. We loved each other, but that didn't stop him from constantly talking down to me. Hey sis, he'd say, patting me on the shoulder at Thanksgiving. You still doing the file cabinet shuffle or worse? Ever gonna get deployed for real, or are you allergic to sunlight? The jabs were light, on the surface, but they cut deep, especially because he knew I couldn't talk back. Couldn't say, actually, I helped track a rogue asset in northern Syria last month. Couldn't mention the 16-hour ops chain I coordinated that led to a successful extraction. Couldn't tell him that I'd briefed someone who'd briefed the president. So I smiled. Took another sip of cider. Let it pass. That was my rhythm. Show up. Stay quiet. Fade out. Until last summer. That's when everything cracked. It was my mom's 65th birthday. We threw her a garden party in our backyard, balloons, folding chairs, string lights. I'd helped pay for the catering, helped clean the porch, helped organize the guest list. I'd even taken emergency leave to fly back from a classified workshop in San Antonio. And yet, during the toast, Michael stood up, lifted his glass, and said, "To the woman who raised 3 incredible kids, Dylan the business genius. Me, the army man, and Elise, our sweet little helper." Sweet, little, helper. I don't even think he meant it maliciously. That's the worst part. It wasn't a jab, it was just true to him. That's all I was. The one who bought the napkins, took the photos, fetched things. I felt my chest tighten, my throat lock up. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Mom smiled politely. Everyone clapped. That night, I cried in the bathroom. Not the kind of loud sobbing that demands attention, but the kind that slips down your face without a sound. The kind you don't wipe because you're too tired. It wasn't about Michael. Not really. It was about the years of being edited out of my own life, of watching others take the spotlight while I protected the stage from collapsing. It was about being the one who kept people safe, who didn't sleep, who never slipped up and still hearing. She just handles mail. That line haunted me. That phrase. Just a clerk. Just a girl. Just a helper. Just invisible. Even at work, the silence had started to wear on me. The higher I rose, the fewer people I could confide in. There were days I went entire shifts without speaking to anyone except through secured terminals. I could deliver a brief that altered global policy, then eat dinner alone in a microwave-lit break room. I began to wonder if it was all a mirage, if maybe my family was right, if I'd chosen a path so buried in secrecy it was indistinguishable from nothingness. Then came a turning point. A new deputy director arrived, someone fresh out of Langley, shiny and self-impressed. He didn't know me, didn't want to. On his second day, he asked me to make coffee for a debrief. I looked up from my station. "Excuse me, I figured you were admin," he said, shrugging. "Aren't you the mail handler?" I stared at him for a long second. Then I stood up, walked over to the terminal, and keyed in my authentication sequence. 3 layers deep. When the classified screen unlocked, I rotated it slightly just enough for him to see the operations list with his name nowhere on it. "Would you like sugar with that?" I asked. He never asked me to make coffee again. But the incident lingered, because it proved what I feared. Even inside the system, I was invisible, unless I made them see me, and that terrified me because I didn't know if I could. What would it even look like to stand tall, to speak without apology, to let them know exactly who I was? I didn't know yet. But something inside me, buried, bruised, but still burning, was starting to stir. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The moment I nearly walked away wasn't loud. It didn't come with fireworks or slammed doors. It came in silence. It came after 46 sleepless hours. It came on a cold Thursday in October, deep in the belly of a secure communications facility outside Arlington, where the lights are always too bright and the air always too dry. We were mid-cycle on a high-priority operation, something involving cross-border surveillance coordination with an allied agency. The mission details were sealed so tight I never even saw the names, only the timestamps, the routing logs, and the alert codes. One of those codes came blinking across my terminal that morning, Q-level relay interruption. Personnel compromised, the kind of message that slaps the breath out of your chest. I locked eyes with the other comms officer on duty, Sergeant Lang. He turned pale. The chain had gone dark. That meant one thing: either the operatives were in deep cover, or they were in danger. What followed was 14 hours of scrambling, rebuilding the routing chain, re-establishing handshake protocols, confirming packet authenticity, reauthorizing the full data stream under what we call battle silence mode. All of it under my hands. My fingers moved automatically, eyes burning. Every second mattered. One misstep and someone on the other side of the world could die. We restored the relay by hour 15. 2 lives confirmed safe by hour 17. By hour 18, we heard the recovery was successful. By hour 20, the report was sealed and filed. No ceremony, no announcement. Just silence. At hour 21, I was sitting alone in the break room, staring at a vending machine sandwich I didn't have the energy to unwrap. My whole body hurt like I'd been carrying invisible weights for 2 straight days. That's when the new deputy director walked in, the same man who once asked me to make coffee. He glanced at me, then grabbed a soda from the fridge. "Hey," he said, "we still have that supply inventory to input." I stared at him. He had no idea what I had just done, what I had carried, what I had prevented. No good job, no acknowledgement, not even a nod. I was a ghost in the building, still. And it broke something in me, not because I needed a medal. I didn't. But because I needed to believe that someone, anyone, saw me, that the weight I carried wasn't invisible just because it was secret. I went home that night to my tiny studio apartment in Alexandria. No lights on, no messages waiting. I collapsed onto the floor, still in uniform, and let the tears fall. Not because of exhaustion, because I didn't know why I was still doing this. Because I didn't know who I was anymore outside of the job, and the job didn't even know me. I thought about resigning. I really did. I opened the folder on my encrypted tablet where the exit protocol was stored. The form was already half filled just in case. Everyone who works deepside has one ready. You're taught to prepare for burnout before burnout prepares for you. I sat there, tablet glowing in my lap. My thumb hovered over the confirmation key. And in that moment, the image that came to mind wasn't the operation or the danger or even the faces I'd never see. It was my mother's, at that garden party, when Michael toasted her and called me our sweet little helper. And I remembered the look in her eyes, not pity, not pride, but something in between. Confusion, maybe. Like she didn't quite know where I fit in the family picture anymore. Maybe I didn't either. I closed the tablet, didn't press send. Instead, I took a shower, long, hot, punishing, and stared at myself in the fogged-up mirror until the steam cleared, and I saw not a ghost, not a helper, not a placeholder. I saw a woman who'd given 12 years to a system that ran on her silence. A woman who'd never asked for applause but deserved it anyway. A woman who knew how to rebuild a broken communications chain with nothing but a code and a heartbeat. And I asked myself, what if the only person who needs to see you is you? I didn't answer that night, but I knew I wasn't done yet. Something had to change. Not the job, not the mission. Me. I was done waiting to be seen. It was time to make them look. You don't change everything in one day. You change everything the moment you stop asking permission. That was the first shift in me, not dramatic, not loud, but real. A click somewhere deep inside. A decision. I wasn't going to disappear anymore. The next morning, I arrived at the facility 30 minutes early, not out of obligation, out of resolve. I sat at my desk with my coffee logged into my secure console and pulled up the relay logs from the compromised operation. I studied every blink, every packet loss, every fragment. Not because I was told to, because I wanted to know what had gone wrong so it wouldn't happen again. Ever. That was when I found it. A 6-second delay in Node Monroe's mission. Not long, but long enough. A subtle error. Not technical procedural. Someone upstream had rerouted through a non-priority relay to save time. Shortcutting. Had the timing been worse, those 6 seconds might have gotten 2 agents killed. I reported it not to my immediate supervisor who'd have buried it, but directly to the Special Ops liaison. I flagged it with a risk advisory and documented the entire trail with timestamps, clearance receipts, and behavioral pattern indicators. No one expected that from just a mail handler. 2 days later, I was pulled into a secure review meeting with 6 men in suits and 1 woman in uniform. The woman was Brigadier General C.J. Whitaker. She didn't look at me like I was invisible. She looked at me like I was necessary. "Monroe," she said, "your audit report saved our asses. That lapse has been happening for months. You just proved it." I blinked and nodded. Then she asked the question that started it all. Why the hell aren't you in the field yet? It wasn't rhetorical. 3 weeks later, I got the Monroe's fur. Not full deployment, my role still demanded a base, but a new hybrid classification, Senior Field Liaison Domestic Intelligence Relay Division. I would coordinate directly with field agents, sometimes in person, mostly from command. My role stayed behind the curtain, but I was finally allowed to step into the wings. And I didn't tell anyone in my family, not yet. Instead, I started showing up differently. When someone at work dismissed me, I didn't flinch, I corrected them. Firmly. When a junior officer assumed I was admin, I handed him a redacted mission brief with my own credentials at the top. When a contractor tried to skip me in a secured hallway, I stopped him. "Ma'am," he said after checking my ID. "Not miss. Not, hey. Ma'am." At night, I began writing again. Not reports letters, not to be sent, just to remember. Letters to my younger self. To the girl who thought she had to be small to be safe. I wrote, "You are not invisible. They just don't know how to see someone like you yet." I wrote, "You will not win their applause. You will outlast their doubt." I wrote, "Power doesn't look like a uniform. It looks like knowing who you are when no one else does." One Friday evening after another long shift, I sat in the metro station in my new field-issued jacket. A young woman across from me, maybe 19, maybe 20, glanced over. Nervous eyes, ROTC cadet pin on her bag. "You in intel?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then nodded. Her eyes widened. "That's what I want to do someday." I smiled, and for the first time, I told the truth out loud. "Then get ready to be underestimated," I said. "And then get ready to scare the hell out of them when they realize they were wrong." She grinned. Something opened in me that day, not because I needed to be admired, but because someone needed to know I existed. And maybe, just maybe, I was the one meant to show them. Then came the family brunch. My mother had called the week before. "It's just a small thing," she said. "Jenna got her clearance to work with the State Department. Everyone's coming. You'll be there?" I said yes, not because I owed them anything, but because I was ready. I wore a plain navy blouse, slacks, no medals, no insignia, just my work badge in my bag just in case. The moment came exactly as I expected. "She just handles mail," Jenna said. They laughed, but I didn't, because I wasn't her anymore, and they were about to find out. The text came through exactly 10 minutes later. "Clearance Alpha requested. Immediate presence required. Escort inbound." I turned my phone face down. Let them laugh a little longer. Let the moment build. When the man in uniform appeared beside our table and said, "Ma'am, Secretary of Defense is requesting your presence," I didn't smile. I didn't explain. I simply stood and walked out, leaving behind the girl who used to need their approval. She's not me anymore. I didn't look back as I left the brunch table. Not right away, but I heard the silence. The stunned, dead silence behind me as I crossed the floor, escorted by a man in full uniform. No one at that table had seen me that way before. Not as a little sister, not as a quiet clerk, but as someone the Pentagon came for. Someone who didn't just belong in the room, but who was needed elsewhere. The valet barely had time to open the door before the black SUV pulled up to the curb. I slid into the back seat and buckled in. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. We both knew the routine. Inside, the car smelled like leather and faint cologne. Outside, Washington blurred past in early afternoon light shadows of monuments and marble. I let the quiet settle. Then I reached into my bag, pulled out my ID case, and clipped it to my jacket. Capped, Elise Monroe, Field Liaison OPs. It still looked Smonrogue seeing it there, not because it didn't fit, because it did, perfectly. We stopped 2 blocks from the Capitol. A second escort met us on foot and led me through the security line where faces I'd only ever seen on TV passed by without looking twice. And then, just like that, I was in the room. Oval-shaped, wood-paneled, sealed against cameras, signals, and noise. A few men in suits nodded as I entered. One woman in uniform gave me a small, respectful smile. And then the Secretary of Defense himself looked up from the table. He didn't ask my name. He said, "Ma'am, we've been expecting you." Not miss. Not young lady. Not office support. Ma'am. That word hits different when it comes from the top. I sat down, opened the black folio I'd prepped the night before, and walked them through a threat posture briefing involving a foreign data interceptor case that had crossed my terminal 72 hours earlier, suspiciously misrouted, tagged, and flagged. By me. 20 minutes later, the secretary closed the folder, tapped it once, and said, "I want this moved forward. Whatever Monroe needs, she gets. No debate, no pushback, just authority, just trust." Afterward, as the meeting cleared out, a younger officer, maybe 30, waited near the door. I saw him glance down at my badge twice before clearing his throat. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I just wanted to say I didn't know someone from your division handled ops at this level." I turned to face him. "Most people don't," I said. "That's why it works." He blinked and nodded. Later that evening, I walked home. No SUV, no escort, just me. My shoes clicked against the sidewalk, echoing between buildings. And when I passed the window of a small corner cafe, I saw my reflection in the glass. I paused and looked, really looked, not at my clothes, not at my rank, at me. The same face they used to overlook, but not the same woman. Back at my apartment, I finally answered the text from my mother. "Mom, where did you go? What was that? Jenna's freaking out." I took a breath, then typed me. That was my job. I don't just handle mail. 3 dots, then nothing, then, finally, Mom. You could have told us. I stared at the screen, then replied, "Me." You wouldn't have believed me. No response. And that was okay, because I didn't need her belief anymore. The confrontation had happened not with shouting, not with revenge, not with theatrics, with clarity, with power, with a door opening where none had existed before, and the truth stepping through. Not everyone will applaud when you rise. Sometimes the people who raised you will be the last to recognize you, but you rise anyway. You don't rise for them. You rise past them. That weekend, I got a message from an unfamiliar email. The sender ID was from the Joint Intelligence Training Command. Subject speaker request, mentorship session for new intel recruits. We're building a mentorship initiative for underrecognized field support officers. Your name came up. Would you consider sharing your story? I stared at it for a long time, then smiled, typed 2 words. I'll attend. And when I showed up the next week in a simple blazer with no ribbons, no ceremony, every recruit stood when I entered the room. Not because they knew my name, but because someone had told them who I was. And that was enough. I used to think silence was weakness. Now I know it's a weapon. But like all weapons, it depends on who wields it and why. It's been 6 months since the brunch, since I walked out on laughter and walked into a room where my voice actually mattered. The funny thing is, no one in my family asked much after that day. Not directly, not out loud. Jenna never texted, Michael didn't call, Mom brought it up only once briefly over the phone. You looked different that day, Elise. I let her sit with that. Because it wasn't for them anymore. It never was. For the first time in my life, I live without apology. Without folding myself small enough to fit in rooms I've outgrown. I don't wait for them to ask what I do. I don't explain. I don't soften the truth to protect their comfort. I serve in silence, yes, but no longer in shame. My days are full now. Training sessions, briefings, liaison flights to strategic installations I can't name. Young officers ask for me by name. Directors email me directly. A quiet ripple of respect follows my footsteps wherever I go. And yet, I still do the same core job. I move messages. I move trust. I move what cannot be seen or spoken of. Only now I walk differently. I walk as someone who knows. Not just what I've done, but who I've become. A few weeks ago, I was asked to speak at an internal DoD recognition event. Not televised, not public, but real. For the people like me, the ones who make the system work from behind the veil. I stood at the podium, heart-steady lights warm. And I said, there are jobs where your name goes on buildings. There are jobs where your face is known. And then there are jobs like mine, jobs where you leave fingerprints, not headlines. But sometimes fingerprints are what hold the whole thing together. The room was silent. Then someone stood. Then another. Until the whole room was on their feet. Applause doesn't fix the past. But it reminds you, you're not crazy for believing you mattered. That weekend I went home. Not to attend a party. Just home. Mom had made tea, the same floral china set we always used for guests. I wasn't a guest. But something had changed. She poured the tea slowly. Sat across from me, no TV on, no noise. Then she said almost too quietly, Michael said you walked out with a man from the Pentagon. I nodded. She looked down, then up again. He said they called you ma'am. They did? I said. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. I thought about that. Then I said, because you thought you already knew me. Her eyes welled a little. Not full tears, just enough. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know how big you'd become. And I'm your mother. That broke something inside me. But it healed something too. I reached across the table and placed my hand on hers. I'm still me, I said. And she smiled. Maybe. But I think you're someone more too. We didn't talk much more that day. Didn't need to. Healing doesn't always arrive in speeches. Sometimes it shows up in shared silence and warm cups of tea. The next time I saw Michael, it was at my nephew's birthday. He pulled me aside after Cake Eyes sheepish. Look about what I said before. He started. I shook my head. Don't. No, let me, he insisted. You're the real deal, Elise. I didn't get it. Now I do. I believed him. Not because he changed, but because I had. Now every time I swipe into a secure room or hand over a file that disappears into the hands of someone whose name I'll never know, I remind myself I am not small. I am not just anything. I am the sum of every silent victory, every night no one saw, every moment I chose integrity over visibility. And that's enough. It's more than enough. I still live alone, still have my tea at night, still take the long walk home when the weather's good. But now when I pass people on the street, I carry myself differently. Not with arrogance, with presence. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, ma'am, and that's the loudest sound in the world.